All right, so yeah, thanks everyone for coming. This is my talk. They can't keep getting away with it, and I'm going to be doing a bit of a threat analysis on the octopus/scattered spider campaigns, which probably some of you have heard of, but we're going to be diving into more about that. So a little bit about me. Who am I? I'm a CTI researcher for 4 years. I've been working for a UK CTI company, and then I moved to go work for a company called Equinix, which is the world's digital infrastructure company. The kind of inside joke is, we're the biggest company you've never heard of. We have 240 data centers around the world, and every time you use the internet, your traffic's going through our exchanges, pretty much. I'm also a co-author of SANS 4589 Cybercrime Intelligence course. It's currently under development and will be available by probably around this time next year, probably. And I'm also the co-founder of the Curated Intelligence Trust Group as well, probably a group of about 160 CTI analysts around the world, sharing information amongst each other. You can find me on the various websites as well. So, who is this group that we're talking about? Who is Scattered Spider, Octopus? Who are these threat actors? Well, they're responsible for basically a big bunch of breaches. The techniques used by this group have been used against organizations such as Twilio, HubSpot, DoorDash, Okta, and then they kind of launched additional they're very persistent and constantly launching campaigns, and they end up stealing all sorts of stuff, accessing backends and credentials and accounts, and all these companies keep getting hacked, basically. So a little bit more about what this campaign is, what this campaign consists of. So they're basically English-speaking cyber criminals. They are successfully compromising Fortune 500 companies that spend millions on cybersecurity, have massive teams, and they still keep getting hacked. They're financially motivated threat actors, and they mainly target North America as well. And they've been active pretty much since around 2022 was probably their main year, but they're still active now. And they launch persistent social engineering campaigns. They're targeting the human factor of security, often the weakest link, and these guys kind of prove exactly how that works. So how do they do it? Kind of a brief summary of actually how these campaigns start and kind of how they finish. So they usually often start with an SMS text, and that contains a malicious link. The user clicks it, they enter their credentials, then they provide the threat actor a 2FA prompt, and then the threat actor logs in with those credentials and performs additional follow-up post-compromise tactics and techniques. However, if the target of the SMS text doesn't immediately enter their credentials, the threat actors are known to actually call that victim, pretending to be the company's IT team, and try and guide them into providing them access as well. And they've been on the phone for up to an hour sometimes trying to convince employees to give them access. And once inside, they move laterally, they gain privileges and establish persistence, and then they go after data. They go after source code, they go after cryptocurrency private keys, they go after whatever they can that they can find valuable, and later they either threaten to leak that data or threaten to sell that data and try to extort the company that they stole that from. An example here of one of these types of phishing texts. This is one that Activision got. So they kind of appear to be like a automated SMS message. They pretend that your employment status is under review, and then they're in the domain. They kind of have the target companies, the company they're posing as, in the domain as well. And then, the victim basically will go to that site. As you can see on the left, this is sort of what it looks like. They enter their username and password, and then the threat actor enters that username and password on their end. Then they ask the victim for the 2FA code, and then they sort of send another automated message, and then once they've got it, they've automatically entered it, and so they're in. Once they've kind of got in, established persistent, moved around, stolen everything, then the victim will sometimes get a ransom note. So in this example, Riot Games kind of received a long email ransom note with a Telegram link to negotiate, basically. And this ransom note was quite revealing of a bit more information about who these threat actors are, because it contained things like they say that their sole motivation is financial gain. That these aren't nation state APT groups doing intelligence operations or anything like that. They just want to steal information, steal data, and ransom it back to the victim as well. And they will also exploit that data as well. And then it's kind of the interesting thing from this ransom note to me was that they also admit that the victim was attacked by an amateur level attack, because it kind of shows more a bit about the cyber criminal psyche as well. But yeah, as you can see, in case I missed it out, they asked a $10 million ransom. So we're going to use this talk is about doing CTI against a threat actor. We're going to be using one of the most important intelligence models, the Diamond model, to actually understand more a bit about this adversary. We're also going to be using the cyber kill chain by Lockheed Martin to sort of explain how they go from stage 1 reconnaissance all the way through to their actions on objective. And then we're also going to be using the MITRE ATT&CK framework to explain a bit more about how they perform each technique. So yeah, we're going to start with capabilities. And this I broke this down into kind of 5 different areas: preparation, social engineering, evading security, attacking the cloud, as well as exfiltrating data. So preparation. One of the interesting things about this campaign is they kind of focus on customers of single sign-on provider solutions. So in case you didn't realize, your company may be listed as a customer on one of these websites. So, Duo, Okta, Twilio, they all advertise who their customers are. So if you want to target a company, you want to find out what SSO provider they use, you just go to their customer testimonials, or they advertise their customer list. So you can use OSINT pretty much to find this information very easily. And then once they do that, they can craft a custom phishing page for that organization using their logo, the company's logo, as well as the SSO provider's logo as well. They will also use data brokers to be able to sort of gather information, to be able to then exploit and target those employees and users. They'll use things like ZoomInfo, Dhashed, Rocket Reach, all sorts of areas as well. You can even use LinkedIn as well if you want, and you can get, just from using these few sources, you can get who their employer is, their name, phone number, email address, and potentially the passwords that have already been breached as well. Social engineering. What do these threat actors actually? What are their primary social engineering kind of methodologies? Well, SMS phishing is probably one of their calling cards. If your organization is getting SSO themed text messages trying to steal credentials from your employees, good chance it could be one of these threat actors. They often use things like schedule changed or employment terminated, just to try and really entice the user to basically click on that text message, because if you're working for a company and suddenly you're saying that they're saying you're terminated, you're going to you feeling the pressure's on. You want to quickly find out what's happening there. And then again, as I mentioned, voice calls and threatening or bribing people, trying to tricking them into giving them access. And Coinbase recently disclosed that they were attacked by a threat actor of this kind of nature. They even say the attacker claimed to be from Coinbase IT team, and they were actually able to successfully compromise that victim's endpoint by installing like a remote admin tool and going through the motions on that, which I'll dive into more in a bit. The other thing that they do is SIM swapping. SIM swapping has been around for a long time, but only recently it's kind of really been used against sort of enterprises such as the ones I've mentioned who have been breached. So what is a bit more about SIM swapping? So SIM swapping involves tricking tricking the mobile provider of an employee's phone number into transferring that phone number to a SIM card that the threat actor controls. So they can do this by basically social engineering the sort of help desk, support admin of your mobile service provider into giving access, taking your phone number and giving it to someone else, basically. And once they do that, then they control your phone number, and they can, basically trigger one-time password codes, password resets, and then log into accounts and things. And successful SIM swaps, for years, they've resulted in sort of targeting cryptocurrency, people, high net worth individuals with lots of cryptocurrency. Those sorts of attacks those sorts of individuals have often been targeted by SIM swapping. But more recently, they're going after enterprise accounts with access to more data as well that can sort of assist in those types of campaigns. So yes, just the possession of a phone number can actually be enough to reset other online accounts and passwords. And once the victim is compromised, the mobile service provider is it's on them, it's their fault. There isn't really much you can do other than rely on the security and processes of that mobile service provider. So a bit more about evading enterprise security. They use remote monitoring admin tools, or remote monitoring and management tools such as AnyDesk TeamViewer. I'm sure if any of you guys do any sort of threat hunting or adversary emulation, you're going to be incorporating these types of tools into those campaigns. They also use session hijacking, basically using browser cookies to steal the cookie and then replay it, basically a replay attack as well. They're using bring your own vulnerable driver attacks to basically disable security tools. Code signing certificates actually stolen from companies. So last year, I believe, NVIDIA had a pretty bad breach and all their code signing certificates were stolen, and threat actors are using those code signing certificates to sign their malware. And then they're also using UEFI bootkits, as well as tunneling tools as well. So a bit more about these RMM tools. They actually use up to 20 different RMM tools. So maybe maybe you have an alert for unauthorized usage of AnyDesk or TeamViewer in your organization, if you're doing a lot of threat hunting. But, if those two tools don't work, the threat actors just move on to the next one and to the next one and keep going until they eventually get access. And the interesting thing about these RMM tools is that, your antivirus, your EDR, is not actually going to flag those as malicious because they're legitimate tools. But the threat actors use them for remote access. Edit this cookie. This is kind of an interesting one. It's kind of unique to these threat actors as well. They actually use a browser extension, which it's basically used for sort of testing in e-commerce websites, whether a customer has gone to that site, added something to their basket, and whether they can go back and continue to add things. That kind of the same principle works with multi-factor authentication protocols as well, and authentication cookies. So if you can, what the threat actor did was they're able to use an RMM tool to connect to someone's device and then steal the MFA token, and then were able to authenticate into other areas as well, pivot into intranets and things. Bring your own vulnerable driver. This is it's another interesting technique that these threat actors do. The interesting thing about BYOVD is that it's been going on for quite a while, but it kind of originated in sort of the game hacking, game cheating communities. They were using these to bypass anti-cheat or turn off anti-cheat, and threat actors realized that they can use that to turn off antivirus and EDR. So once they've done that, it's possible to turn off Windows, kernel protections. They basically bring a vulnerable driver, developed by Intel or something like that, has a vulnerability already in it. So when they deploy it, they can then exploit it. And because it's, a valid driver, then, your detection systems aren't going to flag it as malicious by default. You can create rules to detect this thing, but by default, it's not going to stop it. And CrowdStrike actually said they saw Microsoft Defender, Palo Alto Cortex, and Sentinel-1 EDRs all just kind of fall over to this thing. So yes, and once they've disabled the endpoint, then they can perform whatever actions they want. Another way they can do that, if they don't use BYOVD, they can actually use a UEFI bootkit. This one was called Black Lotus. It was actually sort of developed by someone who kind of came from an anti-cheat background, and they started selling this bootkit on the forums. This one was offered in October 2022 for about $5,000, and these threat actors are actually able to purchase it and use it in their campaigns as well. The interesting thing about Black Lotus is that it can run on Windows 10 and 11. Even with Secure Boot enabled, they can deploy this bootkit and then actually exploit another vulnerability in, I believe it was in Intel processors. And then, they can disable things like BitLocker, hypervisor protected code integrity, and as well as Windows Defender as well. And then you can perform all their sorts of tactics and post-exploitation activities as well after that. So the interesting thing about Black Lotus as well, kind of a side note, is that they wouldn't actually, if you tried to deploy it on a system that had, language or system settings for Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Moldova, or Russia, or Ukraine, the bootkit actually won't work. So in this scenario, I thought it'd be interesting to raise because it's kind of an unwritten rule for malware developers from the Commonwealth of Independent States. They don't target their own. So as long as you don't target your own, then the police and whoever, the government, is not going to come after you. So another interesting thing about these threat actors is that they also target the cloud and virtualization, virtualized infrastructure. They target Azure, AWS, and VMware ESXi. They actually, a lot of the time, they will take the credentials that they've stolen via phishing or potentially stolen via, editing a cookie, and then they actually move and gain access to Azure VMs. And once they have sort of established persistent access on those VMs, they'll then move laterally to other systems and premises as well. And they also, once they're inside Azure, they will then sort of usually aim to export the configuration of Azure AD tenants and their users, and perform all sorts of follow-up attacks, data theft, and other sorts of attacks like that. AWS, the interesting thing about AWS is that what these threat actors were found to be doing was that they were actually beginning to target AWS by exploiting or compromising a public-facing application known as ForgeRock, OpenAM. Once they've got into those, once they've gained access to these applications, they kind of assume the AWS instant roles that sort of come with those. And once they do that, then they open AWS Consular, start creating accounts for non-existent users, establishing persistent access again, and then they sort of pivot into the rest of the environment using their established credentials. VMware ESXi, another interesting one, is because they actually use a combination of two tools, a tunneling tool known as RSOX X, and as well as Level.io, again, another RMM tool. And once they do that, they've actually also been known to launch a port scanner known as Rust Scan from a Docker container onside a ESXi appliance as well. So now we kind of have a more comprehensive idea of how these threat actors are launching their campaigns, what sort of things they're doing, what sort of post-exploitation activities they do once they've passed the phishing, passed the social engineering stage. What do they do after that? Infrastructure, not as long of a section, but we're going to go into more about actually now we know what they do, but actually what infrastructure, what do they do to actually launch it from, basically. So for SMS phishing and VoIP phishing, they've actually been able to use sort of communications platform as a services. So they kind of use Google Voice, Skype, something called Vonage or Bandwidth. A lot of these things sort of like automated voice calling systems. If you want to book an appointment for something like that, sometimes you get like an automated system. The threat actors are actually using that against targets as well as sending out malicious text messages as well in a sort of automated fashion. So one of the ways that we can actually tie all of these breaches together in one way or another is the fact that the phishing pages used to target these organizations are pretty much all the same. Maybe a few minor details here and there, but the main fact is the target company's logo is on the phishing page, and the target company's SSO provider is also has its logo and it's kind of themed that way as well. So it's quite a basic and straightforward phishing kit. Once you've entered your credentials, it actually has like a sort of a Telegram backend to then feed in the credentials that can then be entered, and they can get into your account within the amount of time it takes for a SMS token or a 2FA token to expire. So it's sort of an automated fashion. So I actually gathered a load of domains related to these campaigns, and the interesting thing about these is there's also, imagine these, but imagine each one having like a load of subdomains as well. So they kind of use register a ton of domains. They mainly use Namesilo, 2Cows, and Nyala. Primarily because these registrars extract Bitcoin as well. But yeah, they use, if it has SSO in the domain, if it has Okta in the domain, or like dash cloud or something. So if it's like your company is the subdomain, dash cloud login SSO or whatever .com, likely it's going to be one of these guys. And if it's registered using Namesilo or 2Cows and name servers with Nyala, even more likely. Other interesting thing is that these guys use M247, the hosting provider, to for a lot of their sort of IP endpoints, sort of the like final step in their attacks. They actually use, the interesting thing about M247 is that they are very popular by a lot of VPN companies to host their sort of VPN sort of exit nodes. And yeah, so these threat actors to actually conduct the rest of their campaigns, they use they use things like level, cloud, so what's that? File sharing cloud services, VPS, and Tor. And this kind of highlights the sort of high-level operational security by these threat actors as well, relying on proxy services to sort of conceal their connections. Interesting thing is that these IPs were shared by CrowdStrike, and just by sort of pivoting on the host names that were on these IP addresses, we could then reveal what these services were. So then VPNs, they actually used a range of ExpressVPN, Surfshark, and Mullvad. Interesting thing about these VPNs is, again, they all accept Bitcoin for payment. So you can't trace who actually has purchased these ones easily anyway. And you can use. So the interesting thing is, like, you can use a service. If anyone uses Grey Noise, or there's a service called Spur Intel, will actually tell you. You can just give it a load of IP addresses that tell you which one is a VPN or not. So file sharing sites. Interesting thing about this is the fact that these free sites, Paste.e, RiseUp.com, or File.io, or Transfers.sh. These are free services. It allows the threat actors to upload their payloads or exfiltrate data or download files. So all sorts of delivery systems and services, or file exfiltration. And the interesting thing about these services is, they're valid, they're legitimate, they're not newly created registered IP address like host paid for rented VPSs or recently created domains. And, there's a good chance that your organization's not going to have GitHub, blocked. So that's what these threat actors use to kind of evade sort of network traffic monitoring as well. So you've kind of gone through capability and infrastructure, and we're going to look more a bit about who their victimology is. Actually go after, as I mentioned earlier in this talk, they go after North America, a few in EMEA and a few in APAC. But out of all of the companies that they target, the majority of them are business process outsourcing. And the interesting thing about that is, many companies, they sort of outsource things like sort of HR or content management, or customer relationship services and customer data processing and stuff. Things like HubSpot and one of the other ones they kind of use these services to help manage their customer data. And so by targeting one of these BPO companies, you can then target the data of multiple companies' customers as well. So the interesting thing about that is they also then go after telecoms as well once they've kind of targeted these BPO companies. And again, with these attacks, it's sort of the easiest way to describe it is what we call cyber enablement. So if you want to actually target a company downstream, you'll target something in between you and your end target. So it kind of enables you to then launch the rest of your campaign, hence cyber enablement. Interestingly, at the sort of end of the chain of targeting, a lot of the end targets end up being cryptocurrency exchanges. As well as sort of other companies, gaming companies, Activision and Riot Games and things. And then they also go after seemingly data in general. They're going after DoorDash and companies like that. So a bit more on the victim demographics here. They go after They mainly target the employees at the organization. They go after the IT staff. They go after the software developers because they want to be able to get access to high-level privileged accounts and potentially, code repositories and things as well. They also go after software as a service applications. So, things like anything by Atlassian, Jira, Confluence, anywhere where you have sort of documentation. All good stuff for them to download, steal, and extort it, threaten to publicly leak it. And then you also target collaboration applications as well. So, things like Slack or Teams or GitHub as well. They go after these things. So again, because that's where sensitive information is shared. And it's relatively simple to breach these services because once you've got authenticated access, you can then pivot into many other things. And the types of information they're targeting includes source code, various file shares, so SharePoint, OneDrive, GitHub, these kind of things, as well as cryptocurrency private keys. So I created this kind of organizations targeted by Scattered Spider because the way I did it was that I took those phishing pages, like the ones I showed you before, and then sort of pivoted on the domains and things as well as the sort of similar domain registration patterns as well. And then I was actually able to look at which companies were targeted and then kind of derived what sector that company it belongs to. And I sort of came up with this. And out of those targets, about 27% were business process outsourcing. So impact of victims. So what actually happened to companies who this threat group or these various threat actors have actually, what have they done to them? So Twilio, probably one of the biggest, most infamous cases, is the fact that about 163 Twilio customers were compromised. And that doesn't mean like end users with Twilio accounts. That's like companies that use Twilio for their sort of SMS and one-time passcode authentication systems. So things like Okta. The customer contact information from Twilio was actually stolen, and SMS OTP information was actually accessed by the threat actors. They had access to Twilio's backend with the SMS codes being sent. So that by having that access, they were then actually able to then target other companies as well. So things like DoorDash, Okta, even more down the line as well. DoorDash, again, they got into DoorDash via Twilio. They then accessed customer information, various PII records, and other interesting thing about DoorDash is, it's like the American Deliveroo, basically. They have millions of customers, and once you've got access to that sort of basically very up-to-date details, you can then pick who you want to target on that list as well. The other interesting one is Okta. So Okta say that a small number of their mobile phone numbers were accessed. Associated SMS messages were accessed, and those SMS messages also contain one-time passcodes. And yes, the threat actor gained it via Twilio. HubSpot was kind of an interesting one because they compromised an employee account. They gained access to HubSpot company portals where customer data was stored, and HubSpot claimed that the only there were other affected firms, but the two publicly, declared firms that were affected were Swan Finance and BlockFi. So kind of the financial kind of shows more about these threat actors' motivation. They're going after financially, the financial sector and financial institutions. So next one, impact to more victims. So the interesting thing here, Cloudflare actually came forward and said that 76 employees were targeted in 1 minute. Again, kind of shows like with these bulk SMS kind of sending tools they had access to, the threat actors. And then they said 3 employees actually fell for it. They actually clicked on the link and entered their credentials. Interesting thing about Cloudflare, though, is that because they used YubiKeys, basically the attack was stopped because YubiKeys are pretty unphishable. So this means the threat actor couldn't steal like a 2FA code. The employees have to physically put in a YubiKey to authenticate. So kind of stop the threat actors there. Coinbase. The Coinbase one is probably one of the most interesting because they were successful in the fact that only one of their employees entered their credentials, and the SSO MFA requirement kind of locked the attacker out. Because it's probably some sort of like biometric, fingerprint scan, and then it lets you, and then the SSO service lets you in. However, the employee actually was contacted by the IT team, fake IT team, and they were socially engineered into kind of providing them access. So yeah, basically, once the threat actors were in, they basically downloaded what we suspect is Coinbase's Active Directory as well. But that's pretty much as far as it went, as far as Coinbase said. So Activision had it pretty bad, and then another one of their employees' accounts were compromised via this sort of SMS phishing. I showed you the text at the start of this. And they say, employee information was accessed. And then they also got into some sort of like marketing data as well. So data related to Activision's Call of Duty franchise. And they, shared screenshots and things as well. Quite a not great look for Activision. And then Riot Games, probably one of the worst. They had an employee who had access to the development environment was actually compromised. Source code for League of Legends was stolen, as well as their anti-cheat, and their $10 million ransom was demanded. Riot Games, they said they weren't going to pay the ransom, but I'm sure the cleanup cost of this incident is probably going to be similar amount. So a bit more completing the diamond. do we know about Scattered Spider, Octopus kind of campaigns now? Who, what are their objectives? A bit more about who are they? It's difficult to say because a lot of this information is you're kind of extracting it from threat reports from vendors as well as pivoting on it and doing your own research. I kind of clustered together Octopus, Scattered Spider, and UNC3944 by Mandiant, and kind of focused on their capabilities and their tactics, techniques, and things. And then basically you want to defend against that type of adversary, not really focusing on how each one is connected and who's who and who's what, because, with cybercrime, there's hundreds of threat actors coming and going. So if you may be tracking one, you change to something else next week. So basically, I recommend focusing on the actual, TTPs themselves. So attributes, they're English speaking. They're likely young adolescents based on some of the information provided by Group IP, as well as, the kind of sometimes the immature nature of these kind of attacks and things, and just the sort of usage of things, preference of the tools and things they're using as well. And financially motivated threat actors is pretty much who these guys are. They're not nation state threat actors. They're using pretty straightforward tactics and techniques, and it's kind of rare to actually see some sort of intelligence group using SMS phishing and vishing and things as well. So my summary of who this adversary is, they're not too technologically advanced, but they are rehearsed in getting past enterprise security level. They have quite obscure knowledge in things like cloud and how to get around DDRs and things. They have a focus on social engineering, targeting the human factor. So if you want to defend against these guys, you definitely want to sort of raise your security awareness program to actually be aware of SMS phishing. If you get an SMS message to your personal phone from the company, definitely question whether that's, they're legitimately, don't just immediately follow a link kind of thing. And you just definitely want to. Well, the other interesting thing is they don't actually develop their own malware. If you notice, the whole time they're basically using RMM tools or BYOVD or a bootkit that they purchased on the underground. They're not actually developing any of their own malware, or they're using sort of open source Git tools on GitHub to exploit various applications or the cloud even. So my final assessment is that this adversary should also be treated more like a community of threat actors rather than tracked as like a monolithic entity. This isn't just 5 people working together to attack everyone. There's lots of people coming and going here, basically. So due to this is mainly due to their sort of wide range of TTPs, targets, and actions on objectives as well. So now we've basically completed the diamond. This is everything. Once we've sort of got this information, we can then, put it into a nice fancy CTI threat report, take it to our stakeholders, and then help them defend against this threat before they actually target us. So mitigating these attacks before they happen. I've kind of broken it down into, 4 areas really: security awareness training, purple teaming, incident response, and security engineering and architecture. We have, obviously, security awareness. They're going to want to remind people not to click on SMS phishing messages, and be aware of voice phishing, and make sure, if the IT team claim they're calling you, to hang up and call them back and see if it's the real IT team. For purple teaming, in our organization, we'll work with the red team and develop adversary emulation exercises and basically see if our tools would detect the type of tactic that the threat actors use. Tabletop exercises. So if you work in a CERT or you do incident response for an as your main duty inside an organization, then definitely a good tabletop exercise to do would. How would you respond to a SIM swapping attack? What would be, what's your plan to contact the sort of, mobile service provider or get their employee a new SIM card kind of thing? Security engineering, security engineering have the toughest job when it comes to these threat actors. Vetting RMM tools inside a large organization. I mean, in the organization I work for, there's tens of thousands of employees and 240 facilities around the world. And there's all sorts of software going on, being used and things. And we also do a lot of mergers and acquisitions as well. So whether the company that we've just acquired, what they're using, it's a real difficult thing to actually hunt down the authorized usage of RMM tools. So, I mean, my advice would be to, make sure that you know which RMM tool is used where, or just stick to one or two and then block everything else pretty much, or, allow it on a case-by-case basis and then detect anytime a new version is downloaded. Detecting BYOVD, this is a tricky one, again, because it's similar to RMM tools. It's legitimate software, so you don't want to go instantly blocking legitimate software because you cause all sorts of issues in your environment. But you actually want to probably see if you can try and hone in the vulnerable versions of these drivers and block those as well. Yes, investigating the cloud sites, so the file sharing cloud sites, such as sort of paste sites and file sharing. It's important to actually, verify what sites are being used by your employees, and if for some reason someone's uploading, if someone's uploading 50 gigabytes to Mega NZ, then you may want to check that out if no one else uses it in your organization. And then IAM, identity access management. Definitely want to have a look at phishing-resistant hardware such as YubiKeys as well. So how can cyber threat intelligence help in a situation like this? Well, CTI teams, they analyze, monitor, collect information from the threat landscape. We're constantly, as a part of a CTI team for an organization, we're looking at the latest intrusions and breaches and latest campaigns. We're extracting the information. We're creating detection opportunities. We're monitoring threat actor infrastructure. Like I showed in this talk, like we took all the domains and mapped out all the targets of this campaign and things. And identify new targets and potentially victims, and then collecting the indicators of compromise as well, and then ingesting them into tools and making sure any reported incidents we can also check and review if they try to target us or something like that as well. So yes, thank you for listening. If anyone has any questions, please let me know. So, any questions? There's a lot to take in. Yes, question at the back. Yeah, so bring your own vulnerable driver. It kind of came. In the intrusions that I kind of investigated related to this campaign, they would actually, once they've downloaded the RMM tool, then they would deliver the vulnerable driver to deactivate the EDR after that, or the antivirus after that. It's because the EDR isn't going to detect, it's not always going to alert when a new RMM tool is downloaded, unless you've pretty much set it to do that. You may get some sort of potentially unwanted software kind of alert, but they're not always going to be high risk, and your team is not going to investigate those straight away when they have so many other high related alerts going on. So once they've got the RMM tool on the device, then they will deliver the driver and then use that, basically exploit the vulnerability in that driver to then gain privileges. Yes, question? Good question. It's difficult to actually identify how much this specific group is making, because a lot of their campaigns are, it is difficult because they're kind of related to the groups that do SIM swapping and cryptocurrency theft as well. And they've kind of, you can say like, you can follow that they kind of started with doing that. And those kinds of campaigns have made millions of dollars. But then they've kind of evolved into targeting organizations and targeting data and exploiting that data. And it gets difficult because then it's difficult to say how much they sold the data to another threat actor for, or what they do like when they're compromising accounts and things, and how much they exploit each customer of that account. But these threat actors are sort of related to the they're sort of mingling in with the ransomware groups as well, which we also track very closely. And, these ransomware groups are making millions of dollars by the day. So they kind of, you can pretty much rest assured that they are making, I would be completely guessing at how much they've made so far, But with a ransom demand like $10 million against one organization, and they've attacked, potentially dozens, if at least one of them pays one ransom, they've got a decent amount of money there. Any other questions? No, that's it.